Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, I hope your New Year's starting off well. I really appreciate you all giving me some time off between Christmas and New Year's to kind of get a bit of a reset here, get a fresh set of eyes on some of the weather patterns, and tackle this new year as the pattern begins to change and this winter starts to feel a bit more like winter. Now, just real quick announcement. Tomorrow morning, I have to leave extremely early to catch a flight out of Chicago, so I'm not going to be able to produce a video before I take off due to the early leave. But we'll be right back on our normal cadence again on Friday. So here's just where I want to start off today. This is a map showing you 2023's precipitation ranks by climate district. Now, I understand these climate districts are large. I imagine some of you that watch this down in Florida are going, wait a second, you're kidding me, way this looks, because we know that parts of western Florida along the coast were some of the driest we've had in the last 130 years, and the East Coast here was the wettest. I mean, these climate districts are large. They just represent a general pattern, but I'll think back on 2023, remembering a lot about the way that the jet stream behaved, especially in winter and then in spring. And what I'm talking about here was all winter long, starting about right now, we just had tremendous flow coming in this direction. And that's what broke the drought in California. And we saw in spring this big omega block that set up in Canada brought the flow back around in this direction, which again caused some upslope flow, which is why for the first time in a long time we see such wet conditions here in this part of the Western Plains, the Rockies. I mean, normally we think of this area as being almost like a desert in places, and here it is so wet. We watched late in the year tremendously deep drought that hit parts of the lower Mississippi Basin, parts of the Delta, and then again, of course, the flooding that happened in New England on multiple occasions. So there's so much we could spend time talking about this, and that's not to ignore anybody. But I do want to show you the latest drought monitor. This is the one that was released most recently. We get a new one of these on Thursday morning, and this is how things currently sit. There has been some drought reduction as of late, but some of the long-standing issues we've been talking about continue to plague parts of the country. So here's one we're going to continue to watch. The subsurface soil moisture, so this goes down to root zone here, all right, still is very low throughout a big section of the Mississippi Basin, the eastern, well, really the central Great Lakes, getting here to the Ohio Valley and parts of the Missouri Valley. And just thinking about this, bringing up to speed on some of the numbers we've been looking at, the Mississippi River at Memphis is still about 4.5 feet below low stage. Now, a year ago, starting right now, we began a major recovery. We were about in the same spot, and it just jumped way up here. And we have questions as to whether or not this winter can do the same thing. Because don't forget, last spring that river did flood back in early March. So we'll need to watch quickly for changes in the Mississippi water levels. I can tell you this, over the last 30 days, while much of the Mid-South here has been drier than average, we've seen quite a bit of precipitation from Texas all the way to Minnesota, and this whole region in through here is sitting, better than 200 to 300% of normal precipitation. So December was a bit of a wet one here in the plains, which means parts of that Missouri Valley, Missouri drainage basin has picked up some moisture. But we need to see changes happening into parts of kind of the Intermountain West, the Great Basin area in through here. And we're going to watch to see how this is all going to shift for parts of the Mid-South. I'm just picking out these drier areas here because the jet stream pattern has changed. And I'm excited to kind of get into it and explain to you what I think is going on here. I do want to bring you up to speed on some snowfall data. This would be the season-to-date snowfall total map. It goes through yesterday on the 1st. And remember, this begins on October 1, or really September 30th with the data. Now, it's always good to compare this to average. So this is where you sit in a percent of normal. And I stress this map because while we expect to see a lot of change east of the Rocky Mountains in the coming days and weeks, I do want to make the point here that especially the Sierra Nevada, our southern, mountain chains throughout the west really need to see better flow to start to increase these snowfall amounts. Because if you just have a look here, this is what the current basin conditions look like. So as you kind of line yourself up, just look over here at the values, and the colors kind of give you a good hint. But we're nowhere near where we were a year ago. Now, speaking of a year ago, can I do something for you here? Let me zoom out on this real quick. And I want to show you, there you go. Look at all of North America. Now, I kind of harped on this for about the entire month of December. that we continue to put these deep troughs of low pressure, somewhere around Alaska, right? And the flow was coming around and over the top and doing something like this, and it was splitting around much of the U.S. And we called that like, hey, that is about as El Nino as we could get out of our current El Nino, which we'll bring up to speed on that in a few seconds. That split flow, okay, yeah, dumped a bunch of snow in parts of Alaska, but really left the West Coast out. Now, a year ago, we did not have this. A year ago, it was entirely different. In fact, let me show you what a year ago was. This is 2023. Now, you start to see these southern parts of the mountain chain here in Alaska in deficit, well, somewhat in deficit. And then take a look at the difference for, parts of the West. Now, a year ago, right now, I went back and looked at my video. We were talking about this huge low that was curling itself up here, about to slam into the West Coast, delivering the big knockout punch to the drought that was in the West. But this year, we're waiting to see something like that occur. But I want you to notice the difference between last year and this year. Now, because of the way the jet stream's been responding to the end of a La Nina, because remember, last winter we had a La Nina and the development of an El Nino, most of the United States throughout 2023, when you average it all together, had a warmer than average rank on the temperature distribution. There were a few outstanding areas. I'm thinking specifically about parts of Idaho, getting into Wyoming, Utah, and this part of Nevada. But we can't deny that December played into the hands of El Nino quite well. It was very mild. Everywhere that you see the number 1 means that would be the new warmest December on record here, going back 132 years now. So very mild. All right, so I keep kind of dropping hints that something is going to change. We talked about it last month, that there was going to be a change in this. What has changed? Well, El Nino is plateaued. It's at its peak right now. We've watched cooler water develop here, which means this negative PMM and negative PDO signal still exists. There's still quite a bit of warm water that's in the North Atlantic. The Indian Ocean dipole, remember how much we talked about that in the fall? It has kind of collapsed back toward neutral. So now what we're going to be watching for is the interplay between the MJO running over the top of all of this and this El Nino. Now, just to show you where the El Nino sits, okay, there's over the last, going back to October till now, and it's kind of bumbled around in this area. It's been warming slightly over the last couple of weeks, and we can see it's now at 1.694 degrees C above average. But the big question about all of this, I just kind of tossed out all that alphabet soup about the weather patterns we're talking about, is how it's going to influence the Pacific jet stream. Now, I focus so much on the Pacific when we were back in December, and that was because the Atlantic didn't have some of the highly anomalous components to its flow, big ridges or big troughs, okay, to really influence or outdo what the Pacific is about to do. But now they're going to work in tandem. You see, sometimes when you think about the way the atmosphere behaves, we have to look for what we call constructive or deconstructive interference. Sometimes things all add up to give you something, or sometimes they work against each other to keep the system from changing, if that kind of makes sense. And what we've watched is a big jet extension that's now pulling back, and it's going to change things in Alaska. And while that happens, we're going to finally change things in the North Atlantic, especially to Greenland. And what did I tell? I was like, hey, we got to watch one thing. It is to see if we can get systematic shift in the weather patterns for Greenland or Alaska. That'll change what's going to happen across the U.S. Now, as it stands, I got to watch this guy here and this guy here. Those two troughs are going to be the next two troughs that are really going to, excite things across much of the United States. So let's dig in and figure out what this is going to do. First things first, let me take you to the North Atlantic. Now, we watched all December long the North Atlantic oscillation build up and reach a peak sometime in the third week. It's now been dropping ever since, and it's going to get way down here back into negative territory. Now, this matters a whole lot more now than it does back in October or November. Negative North Atlantic oscillation in January is a whole different animal that we have to be thinking about. So this building up and then dropping off is the Atlantic's help with the pattern change that we're about to observe. It also helps that the MJO is constructively interfering with it. What I mean by that is sweeping out of phase 1 into 2 and 3, which means it's coming across the Indian Ocean, is the right timing to start to get a jet retraction in the Pacific to allow the Atlantic to do its thing. All right? Now, I'll be honest. I could go on talking about this stuff for hours. You would end up, disliking my YouTube channel if I did. But the point behind me telling you all of this is that the pattern's about to make a bit of a shift. And the shift is here. This is what all of that stuff I just said means. We finally start to get flow that comes out of that direction, southwest around these troughs. And what the Atlantic contribution is, when I say the NAO is doing, it's dropping, it's helping to build this guy right here. So what we've got now is a much more active Pacific jet sending waves into the west that come over the Rockies, make the turn to come out of the southwest. Remember how I just harped on northwest flow for most of December? It's out. And now we get this pattern. So you can kind of tell there's a bit of excitement in my voice with all of this. And the reason for that is we have not seen what I'm about to show you in December. And here we are in January, and it's about to change up. So I think you knew where I was going to go next. I was going to be looking at this overall pattern staring down from the North Pole. And we've got a sequence of troughs to keep an eye on. Okay, so playing through Wednesday into Thursday. We've got this low sneaking down here along the Gulf Coast. I'll show you the rainfall from that. Remember, though, I said 1, 2 lined up behind it. We have a low that sneaks into California, bringing in some snow to Sierra Nevada, bringing in some cooler temperatures into the Four Corner states. But look at this guy here. This is by Thursday, getting into Friday. It goes right over the top of the panhandles. It's then going to dip farther to the south. But take a look at that flow. Man, I love this. You see, every time you get a trough barreling over the mountains, you get the enhanced effect of stretching on the leeward side of the mountains, which helps with what we call cyclogenesis, the birth of a cyclone. And this deeper trough here is likely going to have its fastest winds at its base. There's likely going to be a secondary jet that's going to couple with it right here in New England. And all of that means this is going to be producing a system by the end of this weekend that's going to roll up the East Coast. Now, it doesn't look like much, does it? But that is going to be a really important factor for snowfall up the East Coast. Get to that in a second. Now, starting on Sunday, we're going to watch a much deeper trough Sunday into Monday barrel right over the Four Corner states again and exit in the southern plains again. Now, the difference between this one is the ridging that's up the East Coast is a bit stronger. It's actually being supported, believe it or not, by this larger ridge that's showing up in the North Atlantic. That's all a part of that shift and that thing we call the North Atlantic Oscillation. And what this is going to do is produce by next Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday a much bigger system that actually has a linkage to colder Arctic air. See that now? And look, I mean, this is just trough. I mean, there is plenty of cold air for this to use, and it's likely going to dig a system that rolls right through the East Coast. And then it is followed again on the 11th, 12th, and 13th by another broad trough. Now, remember what I talked about last month. We didn't see warm air pinching in here and in through here at the same time, right? Remember, that was our problem. We weren't able to get that. Well, there it is now. So what ends up happening is that. And that is the pattern change that we just wanted, I wanted to see. And it was because I wanted to get moisture back in this system. I wanted to get flow coming back over the top of the Mississippi and the Ohio and the Missouri Basin. I wanted to get things to change up to deliver moisture that's needed. So the big part of this we have to be thinking about is what's the temperatures going to do? What is our soil temperatures going to look like? And how much of this is going to soak in before we lock it all up in some really, really cold air? Now, to give you some broad brush, ideas here, I want to show you what was released by the Climate Prediction Center. From the 9th through the 15th, now remember, this is more week 2. They have got wet conditions continuing to roll up the East Coast, which means this pattern is going to be longest lasting for the East Coast. So we're going to have to watch out for the risk of some wetter conditions in through here. You can also see the risk of wetter conditions coming into the Northwest. And you say, well, why? Because the flow's coming in and doing that. And that's the overall kind of flow here. You then say, well, what about the snow aspect of this? Well, there is the risk, a moderate risk of having heavy snow kind of throughout this corridor. Now, I know a lot of you probably consume some of your weather information off of social media, and I want you to be just a very savvy consumer of that information, because there's going to be a lot of folks posting individual model runs, or they're going to be posting weird liquid to snow ratio maps, and they're just going to show some places getting 30, 40, 50 inches of snow. And I get it. It puts a little bit of worry in some of us, but I want to stick to some of the basics with this just to show you where I think the risk actually exists, okay? So with all of that, let's get to here. There is going to be a large section of North America that doesn't get the moisture out of this. And I want to make sure that I don't leave that out of this conversation. And that's why we go to this map. This is the map showing you the probability of getting less than a ½ inch of liquid total out of this. So much of the Canadian prairie, much of western Texas, pockets throughout the southwest, and a big section here of the northern plains, and maybe even a little bit of the upper Midwest, are left out of this flow. And the reason, again, is because it's coming in like that, okay? So that's, I want to illustrate this potential issue here. But on the wet side of this, I got a new model running here. This is going to be the wetter side of this. So let's take it out just 10 days. That's the probability of getting 2 inches out of this. And here's the chance of 4. So down here where we have ongoing long-standing droughts and the drought that developed in the fall throughout parts of the southeast, we're about to just knock that out. The northwest also has the flow coming in too. That's going to be pretty, bringing pretty wet conditions here as well. So we got all these areas to focus in on. So let's start off with the high-res models. Remember, at first, there's still a low that's curling through California. And as we pick this up Tuesday through midday, getting into the afternoon and evening hours, we see showers moving through this part of Texas, snow showers over the Great Lakes, and here it is. Here's the low. So snow coming into the Sierra Nevada mountains. This low is going to curl itself up almost right over San Francisco by tomorrow morning, and it's going to start to dive into Southern California and push into Arizona. So as this gets set up for Thursday, the first of these lows that's going to come through will be sitting right here. Now this is just the beginning. We're going to watch this one dip over the panhandles and then race up the East Coast. Now speaking of the East Coast, we've already got a big area of high pressure building that's going to set the flow up to be bringing some snow showers across the Great Lakes and then eventually right here on this side of the mountains. But it's the setup that happens after this, the draw on the moisture that's going to come out of the Gulf that's going to really be the big player. And to see that, we've got to flip over to our comparison between the GFS and the European model. So let's find ourselves at that same time step. Here we go, Wednesday into Thursday. Now, I just want to be very careful with this. These are 2 operational runs. We need to look at the ensembles in a second, but we're just trying to figure out where the newest forecast runs are placing that heavy snow. So getting out here to Thursday night and Friday morning, it'll be in parts of Colorado, getting into Kansas. That is pretty well resolved, I think, right now in both models. Showers, possibly some storms to the south of it in Texas. Now this low is going to continue to roll through Kansas into Missouri, but remember, the main component to this trough is farther to the south. It's not the big deep low that comes over just like this. So as I play you out there to Friday night, getting into Saturday morning, you're going to notice how wet this one is down here across parts of the south, the delta, the southeast, bringing in its rainfall. But there is cold air. Remember I told you about that big high pressure cell? That cold air on the back side of it is going to help such that by midday Saturday, getting into Saturday night, there's going to be some snow throughout the Ohio Valley. Now, how much? It's not even worth trying to tell you how much right now. You just need to know that this corridor has the potential for grabbing some snow. We'll have to wait until we get a couple of days out before we can really make a number on this. This is Saturday. And then watch the system roll up the East Coast. That's Saturday night, getting into early Sunday morning. This is now Sunday, 6 a.m., noon, and evening. Now, as that rolls through, watch it again. This is Saturday through Sunday. There's going to be some heavy snow in New England out of this system. Where that rain-snow line is it on the I-95 corridor? Is it back in the mountains? My goodness, that's going to be a tough forecast to nail down. But all the while that's occurring, don't forget that there were other systems coming into the northwest. Look at this. Now, can you watch the northwest for a second? Thursday into Friday, look at this push of some snow coming in here into parts of the Pacific Northwest. And then here's Saturday, a much deeper low rolls in. That's the one that's accompanied by a much, much larger trough that ejects again on Monday right here over parts of Colorado, New Mexico into the panhandles. Now, there's going to be more cold air for this one to work with, and this trough is larger in the models, and it is going to rip out of the southern plains with the risk of severe storms down here in the south. We cannot ignore that. There's going to be the risk of strong to severe storms next Monday night, I think, is the current timing on this. And then this storm system is going to just roll right across the Midwest, and that's how things look by next Tuesday midday, getting into next Tuesday night. Now, you can see what I can see here. For many of us here in the Midwest who did not get snow last year, I mean, we shoveled 9 inches of snow in total where I live near Champaign. This is a system that could outpace all of last year's snow with one shot. But we know so much is going to change. And right now we know that the models have a tendency to give us a northwest trend each new model run, so we'll have to see where the snow moves. It could be all the way back here in parts of Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, Wisconsin. Even though the current runs are taking it right into this area, there's still so much that's going to change with this next system. So I don't want to pin anything down. Don't ask me to pin anything down because I don't know. We just don't know. Too much uncertainty here. But we can add it up. Let's do the liquid side of this first. So when you combine these next two systems, let's take this out. I'll just take it out 10 days. You can see very clearly how wet things are going to be down here in the south and southeast. You can also see the drier section here that's expected out of this flow. So that's a 10-day look from the Euro. Let's take a look at the 10-day look from the GFS. There we go. That's out 10 days. And overall, there's some similarities here that I think give us some confidence in where this forecast is going to go. Again, European and GFS. Only comparing 1 week, this is what you get. So this is just the next 7 days. European is wetter in parts of the Northwest and wetter along the Gulf Coast. GFS is wetter in the interior. That's, I think, the big takeaway between the two differences in the model tracks. But I'm sure we want to see the snow maps. So remember, when we look at these are single model runs. They have changed dramatically over the last few days. But let's take a look at it. European model. Look at the snow coming into the Sierra Nevada, some snow in the Rocky Mountains here. And then the first system brings the snow to Colorado, New Mexico, maybe the Panhandles in Kansas. And then remember, it dives south and rolls up the East Coast. So look at the Appalachian Mountains, getting into parts of West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York. This is where the current model forecast is putting down that snow. That's 1 week from now. But that second system, which starts on next Monday, comes out. And it's currently trying to put a stripe of some pretty heavy snow that rolls right through Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, and into Michigan. That's where it's got the heaviest snow out of that second system. Now, this is not to ignore the fact that the model's putting down fantastic snows, over 3 feet of it in the Cascades, up to 2 feet in the Sierra Nevada, and look at this part of the Northern Rockies. This is a good snowfall map. I love it. I wish everything about this would verify here. But we do need to compare it to the GFS. So that's out a week in the GFS. Similar overall setup. But then as we get out there and add those final 4 days, that's what it looks like. So we're looking for consistency here between the GFS and the European model, and we're seeing some of that. But you can notice the differences are quite staggering in certain places, and as a result, expect a lot of change out of this. That is why, okay, sorry to go back to this, but that's why I showed you this to begin with. You see, this is just an outline of the areas we're going to keep our closest attention on. All right, from there, I do want to show you some probability maps. Now, this is really, I think, where we get our best idea. Next 10 days, who has the best chance at 3 inches? Now we start to identify that corridor, this corridor, the potential for better snows coming into parts of the upper Midwest. And of course, the West, given the cold air and the way these systems dive into this area, is going to be able to pick up quite a bit of snow. Take a look at the numbers in New England as I step this up to 6 inches. New model run here. Go back. Sorry about that. That's what I get for recording a little bit later this morning. And you can see the probabilities here for getting 6 inches of snow in the next 10 days. Parts of Pennsylvania, 70 to 90%. If we take it up to 12 inches, then we can really see the riskiest area for the heaviest snow. Current model runs, European ensemble showing that, and then throughout New England, and of course throughout the Cascades, Sierra Nevada, and Northern Rockies. If we keep going up here, here's the chance for getting 18 inches of snow. I love to see this. And the big reason for that is, you remember, when we look out here, got to go back to 2024, parts of the West really need to build up that snowpack. So that's why we're taking a good look at these heavy snowfall amounts here. What we notice after this is that the jet stream by day 10 is still cranked in terms of giving us that kind of flow. And as we go, our jet is retracted back over toward Japan. So going out here toward the middle of the month, this is about exactly what I was hoping to be able to see. There's weak ridging here. See the arrows? There's weak ridging there. And therefore the flow has to come rolling around. Now, what does this do to the temperatures? Because we know that the week 2 forecast is likely going to be wetter because of that, especially up the East Coast. You say, well, why up the East Coast? Because of that. Look at that. That's a lot of flow coming up the East Coast. So that's the risk of staying wet up the East Coast for a while. But this is not a pattern that steals moisture from everybody. If you had to pick out a drier spot, I'd say it's going to be parts of the Canadian prairie here, and it's going to be part of California. You say, why? California just doesn't have the strong subtropical jet hitting it. It's not dry. It's just drier than normal. Well, what are those temperatures going to do in response to this? Well, here is today's max temperatures compared to normal. This really, really mild air is about to sunset here on us because we go from Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday. Remember, this is the first system trying to curl up here. There it goes. There's Friday into Saturday, so that's when it's trying to roll up the East Coast. Watch the much colder air sink into the much deeper trough by next Monday. So this is your setup right here. We've opened up the Gulf, a lot of warm air getting transported ahead of this. It's full of moisture too. Trough ejects. And this is going to be the big change that happens once we get past the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So watch it on the ensemble averages. Next 5 days, cool southeast, warm Canadian prairie, northern tier of the United States. Watch Alaska. See the warm up happening there? By day 10, warm, warm. So where does the cold go? And that's why we see day 10 through 15, much colder air centering into the central part of North America. Now, there'll be nuances to this. This is looking at an ensemble average. It won't be ice cold every day, but this is the first cold signal we've really seen for winter 23-24. Now, can we get a little help in this from the polar vortex, which is currently quite disrupted? You can see it's even kind of got a look, it's kind of a split look, but we have to reserve that word split for when we see two large cyclonically spinning areas. Okay, so this is a ridge and this is a trough deep in the stratosphere. But the question we're going to have is the chance of getting the polar vortex in the troposphere. So remember, there's two. There's a stratospheric polar vortex, that's this guy right here. And there's a tropospheric vortex, which comes from the Arctic or the polar regions. They've got to sit on top of each other to constructively add together to deliver really, really cold air. Because we know right now that the stratospheric polar vortex is disrupted. Okay, average is this black line. It's down here. And remember, when it gets weakened, that's the best chance at unleashing some of that really, really cold air. If it's really strong, no chance. But if it's weakened, yeah. So we look at all of that and say, well, what's it doing over the next 10 days? And what I'm curious about is January 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th out right there. Okay, this is the big ridge. Look how after the 7th, 8th, and 9th, we start to get the split, possibly. A piece here and a piece here. Sorry, that wasn't a very well-drawn X, but that is a possibility in the models. But I'll be honest with you, the models have been way too aggressive on setting up the polar vortex to be a major player going forward. So I'll be watching it with some, I guess, curious optimism as we go forward. Okay, now this is all just in the near term. We've got so much long-term stuff to be discussing. And go back to my stuff in December, that I think that the back half of this winter is going to favor cold. I really do. I think it's going to be much more frequent cold air intrusions than warm periods. That doesn't mean we won't get warm shots of air, maybe a week, 10 days of it, but I think the colder air is going to be more dominant as we go forward. Right now, the newest update from the Climate Prediction Center suggests that this is what the month of January is going to look like. And I honestly can't make an argument against it. You see where the MJO is set up, what's peaking right now with El Nino, and what we watched in terms of a jet retraction across the Pacific, the North Atlantic response. I love all of it. I think it's all going to be there to set us up for a much different January than we had in December. And that same thing can be made true of South America. Now, I'll give you new long-range information early next week when I've got a whole new suite of model data to look at. Plus, I got a little bit more time to study the pattern. But in the meantime, this pattern change is also hitting South America. So remember, what did I tell you the biggest problem was with South America? We had flow coming out of the subtropics here. We had dry Amazon. We had a late start to the monsoon. After it came on really heavy and with heavy rain in September, it just failed in October. What has changed as the MJO slid around is this. That's where the flow's coming from now. So what's the significance? This is where the really humid tropical air is. It's not here. That's in the subtropic highs. And what this is doing is it's starting to really increase the chances of getting moisture in a place that's desperately needed. Now, I showed you all the ranks maps. We've looked at all these indicators that show how terrible the conditions are. And here's the newest, the last 2 months. In fact, we could go 3 months. You can see here just how dry things have been while it's been wet in central and southern Brazil. Okay, this is over a 3-month time period, so September 26th to Christmas. But if you get the flow to start coming around in this direction, it's going to do this to the precipitation chances. Our first map on precipitation is showing the next 10 days the chance of getting 4 inches of rain. And it's right now 90 to 100% across some of the driest acres here. Now that's the big number. If I go down to 2, darn it, I'm so sorry about that. This is the chance over the next 10 days of getting 2 inches. And the reality is we're looking at quite a bit of moisture coming in with this system, this change in the flow, the change in the flow. And if we come down here and just look at precipitation anomalies over a 2-week time period, we see that over that time period, we've got a pretty high chance at getting kind of a drought, well, I won't say drought ending, but working against this drought in a big way. Now, this is where the problem comes in, okay? Because if this wet weather establishes itself here and we put moisture into the ground that can be recycled locally and the flow doesn't get back into a terrible configuration to shut the monsoon down again, this could give us 6 weeks of risk in terms of wet weather in this area. Now, I don't have confidence in that, but if it does, we now have a crop that's been damaged by drought. We're then going to be following with very wet conditions through mid-January, maybe even beyond that. In fact, some of the longer range models through mid-February keep it wetter in this area. But if that's the case, if it stays that way, in other words, we don't go back into drought, but we stay this way, then we start talking about delays in harvesting, which is going to push the crop calendar back even farther after how much it's already been pushed back by the late plant and replant that happened due to the excessive heat and drought. So to be honest, this is too much. And that's going to be the main story as we go forward. Now, I'll be looking at the potential risk of this being overdone. We'll look at some model trends, and we'll also look at some other things as I meet back with you again on Friday this week. And then, of course, it'll be a main topic of discussion all next week and through the rest of January as I get back on my normal cadence here. But I want to spend a lot of time with you today just to kind of go through all these things, and this is what we're watching. So I hope you all have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again on Friday. Thanks.